You're all set.
Thank you, Deb. Good evening. My name is Fred Chase, and today is August 28th, and I will open this meeting of the Rules and Procedures Committee of the Bridgewater Town Council. I'm joined this evening by the other two members of the Town Council, Councilors Brad McKinnon and Paul Murphy, the Vice President of the Council. So we are all the members. We constitute a quorum for doing business, and we have one item before us for consideration tonight. I'll firstly just read the COVID disclosure statement. Pursuant to Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2020, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency, and the March 31st, 2025 extension granted by Chapter 22 of the Acts of 2022. This meeting for the town of Bridgewater will be fully remote and accessible to the public through remote participation to the greatest extent possible. No in-person attendance is permitted. Citizens who wish to tune into the meeting may do so via Zoom. So let me just, I'll call the meeting to order, and I'll ask you, Deb, do we actually have minutes for approval tonight?
No, they're not. I'll have them for the next meeting.
Okay, that's fine.
Right.
I wasn't sure if we had one outstanding, but that's fine.
I think there's one or two outstanding, but I will get those on the agenda.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And the one item referred to us for consideration tonight is proposed zoning ordinance FY 24-003, Chapter 7.7 Specialized Energy Code. And I've looked at the actual proposed ordinance prepared for us, and I see that it was first introduced to the council on November 21st, 2023, certainly a long time ago. There's a second reading indicated, the second reading date is March 26th of 2024. I believe that was actually a committee hearing date on this matter, because this did come up before the Community and Economic Development Committee. And I think that was the date of that. So it wasn't really a second reading before the full council. But again, I didn't see any further note at the end of the ordinance indicating committee work. So I think that's the committee meeting date that took place. So I had originally brought this forward at the request of Dr. Hunt, who I'm sure, as you realize, has been a longtime champion of the so-called green communities legislation in Massachusetts, which we have adopted. We are a green community, and this is an optional, an opt-in provision that we can discuss a little bit. And it was proposed, I should say, it was considered by the Community and Economic Development Committee. Rather unusual in one sense for it to appear before two committees, but since it is a zoning ordinance, that was the appropriate thing to do. It's before us because it is a proposed ordinance. Frankly, there's not a lot for us to consider, in my view, with respect to the propriety of this in light of our charter, for example. I don't think there's any issue that arises there. We have already in Bridgewater, I think as you probably know, adopted what's known as the stretch code, exactly, which predates this specialized code. So we did have a presentation a few weeks ago by Lisa Sullivan, who's a Bridgewater resident and a former member of the planning board, and she's now affiliated with the I think with the Department of Energy Resources. And she was joined by another gentleman, one of her counterparts. I'm not sure, I don't recall his name, unfortunately, but they did do a quick presentation going over some of the high points of the ordinance, and we had a brief discussion in council about that. But It was really just intended to kind of basically refresh ourselves as to what the nature of this proposed ordinance is about. And the slide deck that was presented in March of 2024, I did circulate to each of you. I actually attempted to print that document, Deb. For some reason, I found it's impossible to print, but it's possible to view.
Okay.
So I actually do have it up on my computer, and it's something at least that for whatever reason it would not print. So I guess let me just begin by saying that the whole point of this ordinance, were we to enact it here in Bridgewater, is to make our town fully compliant with what would be the emission standards proposed for Massachusetts, not proposed, but which will be required for Massachusetts to achieve net zero emissions by the year 2050. Now, there are some 250 or so communities in Massachusetts that have adopted the stretch code, which we have as well. And there are some, I don't have the number, some 40 or 50, I think, communities.
I think it's 41.
40 or 41?
I believe so, yes.
Okay, which have adopted the specialized energy code. What I thought I might do, just to do this as succinctly as possible, I thought I might refer to the second page of the ordinance and read into the record just a few of the basically the bullet points that appear under the explanation, just to kind of give to ourselves and certainly to the public who might view this some sense, or at least to help them recollect, perhaps if they saw the presentation, what this is about. So the explanation reads: the Climate Act of 2021 required the development of new municipal opt-in specialized energy code. The statute requires that the specialized code is formulated to ensure new construction that is consistent with Massachusetts greenhouse gas limits and sublimits set every 5 years from 2025 to 2050. The specialized code consists of the IECC 2021 energy code with Massachusetts specific amendments, plus additional stretch code and specialized code amendments. Communities may opt into the specialized code. So just again, with respect to these bullet points, the first one, this is with respect to new residential construction. The specialized code requires the following above and beyond the stretch code. So these would be the new requirements for new residential construction under the specialized code. And the first bullet point is for mixed fuel homes, 4,000 square feet or under, those homes must, one, be pre-wired for electrification. And I think that would extend to, for example, providing wiring and equipment for electric vehicles. And two, to install on-site solar PV panels when following the stretch code HERS pathway, HERS acronym pathway, with an exemption for shaded sites. That's a mouthful, and without going into more context, it's kind of hard to envision what that's really saying, but it would require on-site solar, either on a rooftop if the house provides adequate space on rooftop solar, or it could be elsewhere on the property, in a backyard or something like that. Some ability to construct the appropriate amount of solar, which would generate, and I've seen the number, but I can't tell you offhand what it is, what amount of power it would need to generate. So that would be the requirement for a new residential construction using mixed fuel. So that's for Mixed fuel being a home which is otherwise going to be either heated or have hot water heated by, let's say, by either gas or oil. So that's a mixed use, a mixed fuel home. Secondly, for mixed fuel homes over 4,000 square feet, they must achieve, here's the acronym again, HERS 0 or FIAS 0 requirements. Okay, I cannot tell you off the top of my head the significance of what those mean. It's something that I think is easily discernible in the slide material. And also be pre-wired for electrification and install on-site solar, photovoltaic, or other renewables to achieve zero energy building definition. So those are residential, new residential. And for new commercial construction, the specialized code requires the following above and beyond the stretch code. Again, mixed fuel buildings must be pre-wired for electrification and install on-site solar photovoltaic panels of a minimum of 1.5 watts per square foot, I think is that designation, for each square foot of the 3 largest floors, or for 75% of the potential solar zone. Obviously, some of these terms are defined terms that we specifically would need to look at the provisions of the Act in order to fully understand. I'll get to one thing in a minute. And finally, meet minimum HVAC equipment and service water heating efficiencies. So obviously, what we know is that the specialized code would apply only to new construction, and it is intended to meet the emission requirements that will be imposed by the state as of 2050. That will be net zero net emissions. Now, let me just, I guess, because there's quite a lot of technical information there, and not a lot of it, which frankly I think we're here going to delve into. But let me ask if either of you have any particular comments or questions just at this moment.
None for me.
I don't have a question, Councilor Chase, but I have maybe a question. After reviewing the ordinance the first time, listening to the presentation, it seemed from a few emails or conversations that I had that it seemed there was very mixed. Maybe this isn't appropriate now and we could wait till the larger town council, but it was very mixed reaction. And so I'm wondering if this would constitute perhaps appearing, if the town council so chooses, on a town ballot at the next election for the citizens to decide.
It's a valid question. I think that's a question that if we were to do so, I don't know at which election that would actually take place, but I will say to you that it's well worth looking into that. And I think so because again, it's a matter that while it is within our purview to adopt such an ordinance, it is something that I think is already clear just from our remarks, or my remarks already this evening. There's a great deal of confusion about, and I think to some extent there's some misinformation about. One thing I will point out, and unfortunately, Dr. Hunt had a conflict this evening, and he couldn't attend to discuss this further, and I know he had hoped to be able to do that. And I think that he is certainly, for our purposes locally, a valuable resource. He is a good authority on the background of this law and what its implications would be. I think that is a question. If we want to pursue that, I think we could look into the possibility of fashioning this as a ballot question for some future election. Now, again, there is not, this is, as you know, this is a voluntary thing. It's an opt-in provision. And there's certainly no great sense of immediacy to it. I say that, but I bite my tongue at the same time because, of course, you know, yes, there's immediacy here because it's a climate issue, but nothing is required of us, you know, in the short run, and certainly we wouldn't want to be in a position to, you know, sort of hastily take an action that would be regrettable later. I mean, personally, I'm generally favorable to the legislation, but I will tell you, and you may recall that when this matter was discussed by the Community and Economic Development Committee, on which I also serve, you know, our vote was 1 in favor, 1 opposed, and 1 abstention. So it's certainly something that, and as you indicate, Paul, you know, it's not necessarily, you know, at this point met with universal acceptance. So I think it's certainly something that does, you know, bode well for us to proceed at a very slow pace and give it ample consideration. Let me ask you, Brad, do you have any particular comment or question at the moment?
I mean, I'll just be honest, just like at the CED committee, I know most of the things that people don't want to talk about, the prices and all that with the construction, the HVAC, all the extra money for all the new models that break constantly. And I'm not for this. I'm for solar. I'm a roofer. Most roofers don't say they like people having solar on their roof, but I mean, if you want solar, I'm for it. I'm not really for forcing people who want to move to town into that, raising house prices on newer construction when all the construction prices are already through the roof. I mean, I get it, I do, but I personally think the stretch code is enough at the moment where we sit in the town.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I, you know, I think that is a sentiment that, you know, you're not alone in that. And I think it's something that has to be considered. I know that what the proponents of the legislation indicate is that notwithstanding any initial added cost to construction, the payback period is really pretty quick and significant, not only in terms of the savings, but in terms of the further eligibility for you know, tax credits and other kinds of incentives. So it really does for the home purchaser, you know, who obviously is in it for the long run. It does have benefits that aren't, you know, readily apparent on day one to the builder.
Yeah, 100%. I get that. But at the same time, as I'm saying, not everyone is going to want to move into town and have solar panels on the roof over fear of my house is going to catch on fire. They already have to worry about the car charger if they don't even have an EV car in their garage as we speak with the stretch code. So that's just what I'm going off of. Like I said, I understand there are positives to this, like everything, though, there are negatives too. And me personally, I think the negatives outweigh the positives at the moment where our economy is, and not just as local, federally, the whole world is a mess. And I don't know, I want to be able to afford a house in this town if I ever wanted to, and not have to go against prices like Wellesley and all the 40 other communities that did pass this, and their median house price is a lot more than towns like us with just a stretch code. And that's why, in my opinion, I think there's only 41, or say, I think it's 41, it could be more, but there's 41 compared to 250. I think there's more that speaks more than it doesn't, in my opinion.
Okay. Well, that's a good comment. I'm glad to hear your thoughts on that.
Councilor Chase, could I just add on, I think, to your comment following my previous comment, I think looking at the ordinance, as you mentioned, I think it's, a major issue with sort of a long-term impact on the town of Bridgewater.
Mhm.
That could affect, development one way or the other.
Mhm.
So I think, my stance would be, I'd love to see the citizens weigh in on something that's impactful long-term, that doesn't necessarily bound us by time on making a decision by the town council. So I think that's where I would stand with it, but
Mhm.
I have no issues with the ordinance as written right now either, since that's
Okay,
what we're actually discussing.
okay, all right. Tell me this, one thing we might do, if you're inclined to agree with this, we could be in a position to return this matter to the council without any action at all. In other words, we're not voting it up or down. We're just returning it because we're not taking a position on it. And we shall have fulfilled our obligation by having this meeting and this discussion that we're engaged in. It's a case where, it may not accurately reflect our sentiments if we were to vote in opposition to this, because what we're saying is, we don't necessarily know that we have the information we need. We don't believe that this is something that requires any great immediacy on our part or the council overall. And so therefore we want to return it to the council, where the council could just consider a final vote at the next reading in full council, which would be an up or down vote. In other words, that's one possibility, that we return it, and specifically saying that, we're just returning it without a recommendation. It's up to each of you how you'd like to proceed.
Doesn't it have to be referred to advertising?
Well, if it were to be approved, right, it would be referred to advertising as any new ordinance. I think that, well, again, it is written as a zoning ordinance, and which I think it has to be, because I think that's where our current stretch code provisions appear. But it's not, how should I say this? It's not something I think that the planning board itself has weighed in on, and I don't know that they need to. That's a question, frankly, I'd have to ask of Jason, and I don't know that he's given this any consideration at all at this point. Hasn't come before him. But for our purposes in the council, I think that, we're in a position where we could, if we decide, tell the council that, yes, we've conducted our meeting. We had questions and concerns. We simply are returning this without a recommendation. It's up to you, unless you'd like to take a more, determinative vote. And we're free to do that as well, based on anyone's motion.
Well, Councilor Chase, we can or can't abstain from this after our last night's meeting,
Well,
because that may answer the question for me.
that's a tough question. I will say this, I think that you're always in a position that you may abstain. And I think, as Jason pointed out last night, for purposes of vote tabulation, it has the impact of a no vote. Now, and again, it so happens that Rules and Procedures did have one abstention when it was considered there. I think there are other matters that have been returned to the council without recommendation. And I think that it simply means that, we're not saying that we're opposed to it, but we're just saying that we're not in a position to give the council, the benefit of our guidance one way or the other. So counselors, it's back in your lap. But it's up to you. If you feel that, we should have a vote based on it as it appears before us now, and that your vote would be in opposition, then we can motion that, and we can do that. I guess I kind of think that I don't want to say a cleaner way to do it, but I think a more accurate way of reflecting what we're talking about might be to say that we just don't feel we have a recommendation. But that's however it sits with you folks.
Yeah.
I would agree with that approach. I like that approach.
Okay. Brad, do you think that that's something that sort of captures your feeling on this at this point?
I mean, I know how I feel, but I'm not gonna make a motion for it because I don't think I'd get the votes for it.
Okay. Okay. Well, okay. I mean, not that we need to be unanimous. I mean,
I do-
obviously.
Like the idea of just sending it with no recommendation at the same time, though, a little bit.
You think you favor that a little bit?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
And Councilor Chase, just for clarity, and maybe you have this answer. Our vote is not on the ordinance itself. It should be on whether it complies with the rules and procedures, right? Is that actually what we're voting on?
Well, that's correct. And that's why I said a little earlier, there's not an issue that certainly has occurred to me at all
Right.
in any respect as to the propriety of this proposed ordinance, with respect to our charter or certainly state law. There's no issue of overriding significance like that. And sometimes matters do come to us on rules and procedures. It's an ordinance, so it has to come to us. But this is one of those cases where it's not really that we have to look to our charter and decide, well, is there anything in our charter that prevents us, or that would cause any kind of conflict or confusion because of this? And is this in compliance with state law? Well, yes. Well, we know that it is. So the point is that issue for us is not one tonight for this particular matter. And so therefore, we are counselors, and we're members of the full council. We have opinions on matters. Now, I always take the position that when something comes to rules and procedures, it should be considered. And if we're in a position to rule on it one way, actually take a vote, send it back to the council. We've done our job, right? The council's got something to rely on. Well, what do rules of procedure say? Well, they talked about it and here's their vote, right? But, on occasion, this being one, the matter that's before us doesn't squarely fit into what is the kind of the official purview of the Rules and Procedures Committee. So therefore, what we're looking at, we're treating this like, we're counselors. So, we're each saying, well, what's kind of your feeling about this? Is it something you think is beneficial, or is it potentially problematic, or, how do you feel about it? And I think we've expressed that, as we should, we're entitled to. Because there's no overriding issue of law for us to look at in this, certainly nothing I'm aware of. We're in a position where we can kind of sidestep that and say, well, okay, well, let's just look at the meat of it and make a decision. Does it make sense? And is it something we're inclined to agree with? Which is what the council is also looking for us to do. Because remember, I mean, just in the let's say almost half hour that we've been talking about this, the council itself, the full council, you know, yes, on some matters, we do spend a half an hour or a heck of a lot longer talking about matters before us. But on many council matters that come for a final vote before the council, considerably less time is spent, sometimes because much more time has been spent already in committee, you know, where some things have been hashed out. So I think we're frankly perfectly free to approach this, you know, again, because I don't see that there's any, for lack of a better term, you know, any legal issue that we need to consider. I think it's really a question of, you know, what is our recommendation? And I think what we all share in our comments is that, you know, there's a certain degree of uncertainty, a certain degree of, well, certainly I think throughout the community, confusion over this issue. But I think that we're not in a position necessarily to clarify all of that. And maybe with, you know, appearing for a second reading before the full council, maybe there'll be more light will be shed on this. I don't know, but you know, for example, I know that if Dr. Hunt were here, you know, we'd be spending some time getting into the nuts and bolts of this, which exceeds certainly my capability in terms of the specific technical provisions of this. But so yeah, maybe in that case, maybe Dr. Hunt would have some final thoughts on it that might be influential for the full council. I don't know. But I think that we're in a position looking at this as best we can. And I think that, you know, we've had some very reasonable and credible concerns about it. You know, is it something that we, you know, feel very affirmatively that we can guarantee that this is beneficial for the community? And I mean, I want to believe that ultimately it would be, because as I said, I'm generally in favor of it. But I honestly can't sit here and tell you that I have been able to consider every facet of this, the implications of this, cost-wise and otherwise. I wouldn't be honest in doing that. So I don't want to, I certainly don't intend to snow anyone by saying that.
So can I, Councilor Chase, then make a motion to send back to the town council without recommendation? Should we
Okay.
vote on that measure?
I'd say,
Okay.
I was literally just about to make that motion if you.
Okay, all right, so we have a motion and a second. Any discussion further for either of you?
I just feel, as I feel, Paul, and you too, Fred, think that this should be discussed with 9 instead of 3. And I mean, Carlton is a good ear with all this. He's pretty educated with all of it. But as I said, I'm not really for it. I'm in the construction field. I get most of it. And I'm for greens too. It's just, I'd like to send it with no recommendation at the time.
Yeah, well, okay, just for my comment, I would say, I think that's probably the most prudent thing for us to do. You know, we're being honest with ourselves. We're being honest with our fellow councilors. You know, and frankly, if there's more information that comes that is beneficial to the full council, great, you know, so be it. So I would say then we had a motion and a second, and I think we can do this by just a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? I see no one. So our vote is 3-0 to return this to the council without recommendation. And certainly, I certainly feel free in offering an explanation to the council, you know, as to, you know, the nature of this vote and why we made the vote we did. So I think that we're in good stead. But again, at least we had an opportunity to kind of refresh our memories as to what this was about. And it doesn't seem like in the intervening months there's been any tremendous, tremendously influential new information that helps us get over the hump. And I think we're just not in a position to make a really informed decision. So I think that's a good result. I think we should feel good about that. There's nothing further on our agenda for the evening. I would consider a motion for adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, second,
Motion and a second. All right. A voice vote in favor of adjournment. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Very good, and that passes. I want to thank you all very much for joining tonight. We do need to make, I think we now have a potential date for the next meeting that Debbie had discussed with us earlier. I think on the 5th. Is that what we finally? Is Debbie still with us?
Yeah, I'm still here. It's September 5th. I'm gonna post it tomorrow. September 5th at 7 p.m.
That's great. On the other matter that we have coming
Yep.
before us most immediately, right?
Yep.
And we'll pick up from there. I thank you all very much and wish everybody have a great night. Brad, I hope you continue to feel better, start to feel better.
Have
Yeah.
a good night, everyone.
Have a good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye-bye.